The sound wasn't loud, just the heavy, sickening shift of a teak bookstand sliding inches across mahogany. But in the reading room, it sounded like a gunshot. My hand, usually steady as a surgeon's, had slipped. The edge of the 17th century vellum manuscript grazed the table. I didn't breathe. I didn't look up. I didn't have to. I could feel her eyes on the back of my neck, heavy and unblinking, 10 years of perfect, curated discipline fractured in a single heartbeat. Not because the book was heavy, but because Sadie was watching. I am the head of preservation. My life is measured in relative humidity and the pH levels of linen rag paper. There is a specific comfort in the chemistry of binding glue, a predictability in the way ink fades over 400 years. It follows rules. Entropy is slow, manageable, if you keep the temperature at exactly 65 degrees. Every morning starts the same. The swipe of the keycard, the hum of the climate control systems waking up, the ritual of the white cotton gloves. I pull them on one finger at a time, smoothing the fabric until my hands are no longer my own. They are instruments of the archive, neutral, safe. I check the hydrometers, I align the spines, I suppress anything that resembles volatility. The University Rare Book Collection is a sanctuary of silence, a place where history is kept under glass, protected from the messy, chaotic decay of the outside world. I built myself to match it. My spine is as stiff as the Victorian folios in aisle 4. My voice is modulated to never disturb the dust. I thought I was preserving the books. I didn't realize I was just preserving myself, sealing my own history inside a vacuum-sealed casing where nothing could touch me. Then came Sadie. She arrived 3 weeks ago, an external appraiser brought in to authenticate the sprawling, chaotic estate of a deceased poet. She doesn't fit in this room. She is a disruptive frequency. While I glide silently on rubber-soled shoes, Sadie announces herself. You hear the click of her boots on the parquet floor before you see her. You smell her, not the dusty vanilla of old paper, but something sharp and alive. Rainwater on wool, sandalwood. The metallic tang of the storm she seems to drag in from the street. She moves through the archives with a fluidity that sets my teeth on edge. I treat these objects like holy relics. She treats them like old friends. I watched her yesterday, leaning over a map from 1650. She didn't hover. She leaned in, her weight resting on one hip, a casual, confident posture that made the sterile room feel suddenly small. She wasn't wearing gloves. She doesn't have to. She's an appraiser, not a preservationist. But seeing her bare fingers hover millimeters from the ink felt illicit. It made my own gloved hands ache with a phantom sensation I couldn't name. A sudden, sharp desire to strip away the cotton and feel the rough texture of the world again. I told myself it was professional irritation. She was messy. She was loud. She laughed once, a low, throaty sound that bounced off the high ceilings and seemed to vibrate in the glass of the display cases. It was a violation of the code, but irritation is a convenient mask. It covers the tremor that starts in my stomach when she walks in. It hides the fact that I track her movements in the reflection of the glass cabinets, watching the way light catches the sharpness of her jaw. I hate the way she looks at me, not with the deferential nod of the grad students or the distracted glance of the faculty. Sadie looks at me. Her amber eyes are too perceptive, scanning my face the way she scans a provenance document, looking for the forgery, the repair, the hidden damage. She sees the tension in my jaw when I lock a case. She notices the way I hold my breath when she steps too close. Today, the air in the reading room felt heavy, pressurized. The storm outside was pressing against the windows, turning the afternoon light into a bruised purple. Sadie was sitting at the main appraisal table, a stack of correspondence in front of her. I was supposed to be working on the bindery records in my office, but I found myself out on the floor, arranging a display that didn't need arranging. I needed to be near that disruption. I needed to understand why the smell of rain made it so hard to focus on the inventory list. She looked up as I approached. She didn't speak. She just tracked my approach, her pen pausing over her notebook. The air between us wasn't empty. It was full of static. It was the moment before the lightning strikes, the charged, thick atmosphere that makes the hair on your arms stand up. I should have turned around. I should have retreated to the safety of the preservation lab, but I didn't. I walked straight into the field of her gravity, ignoring the warning bells that had kept me safe for a decade. I brought the Book of Hours to her table. The manuscript was small, a devotional volume from the mid-15th century, bound in blue velvet worn smooth by time. Usually, the transfer of an artifact is a meditative act for me. I set the foam wedge. I lower the book. I open the cover. But today, the mechanics felt like walking a high wire in a gale. Sadie didn't move her papers. She watched me clear a space, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes following the white cotton of my gloves as they moved against the dark wood. I set the manuscript down. I switched on the magnifying lamp, the halo of white light illuminating the gold leaf. French, I said, my voice sounding thin, too brittle for the humidity-controlled atmosphere. Circa 1460. I was reciting facts to create distance, piling data between us to keep the air from getting too thin. Sadie leaned forward. The movement brought her shoulder within inches of my arm. She wasn't touching me, but the heat radiating from her coat was palpable, a wave of warmth pressing against my side that flooded the space between us. I tried to focus on the illumination, on the tiny painted saints trapped in their borders, but my peripheral vision was filled with her profile. She wasn't looking at the saints. She was looking at my hands. You handle it so gently, she said. Her voice was low, a drop of dark ink in clear water. It wasn't a compliment, it was an observation, delivered with a slow, deliberate cadence that made the hair on my arms rise beneath my cardigan, like you're afraid it might wake up. It's fragile, I corrected, keeping my eyes fixed on the page. The binding is compromised. Is it? Sadie shifted, turning her body fully toward me. The rustle of her coat was deafening in the quiet. She reached out, her bare hand hovering over the page I had just turned. She didn't touch the artifact, but she was close enough that I could see the fine lines of her palm, the small scar on her thumb. Or are you just afraid of handling something with a little life left in it? The question hung there, suspended in the hum of the lamp. It wasn't about the book. We both knew it. She was asking about the sterile perfection of my life, the gloves, the temperature control. She was asking about the passion I had flattened into preservation. My heart hammered a sudden, violent rhythm against my ribs. I felt a flush climb up my neck, hot and exposing. I needed to turn the page. I needed to show her the next plate, to keep the professional pantomime going. I reached out. My hand, usually a steady anchor, betrayed me. A tremor started at my wrist, a fine, uncontrollable vibration that traveled down to my fingers. Passion isn't about preservation, is it? She murmured, her voice dropping to that sultry register that vibrated in my chest. It's about the risk of ruin. That was the moment. My hand jerked, just a fraction of an inch. But my knuckles hit the heavy teak bookstand. Thud. The sound was sickeningly loud, a wooden crack that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. The manuscript shifted. For one horrifying second, it teetered. I gasped, a sharp intake of air that sounded like a sob, and froze. I didn't grab it. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too hard. The silence that followed was absolute. The air felt vacuumed out of the room. I stared at the book, safe but askew, and then, slowly, terrified, I looked at her. Sadie hadn't moved to catch it. She hadn't flinched. She was just watching me. Her amber eyes were wide, dark, and completely unflinching. She was mapping the panic on my face, reading the breakdown of my control like it was a text she had been waiting to translate. She didn't look concerned. She looked satisfied. She saw the tremor. She saw the crack in the armor. My voice failed. I pulled my hands back, clutching them against my chest. I need the spatulas for the pages. It was a clumsy, desperate lie. Go, she said softly. I turned and fled, the click of my sensible shoes sounding like gunfire as I abandoned the reading room, leaving the book, and my dignity, exposed on the table. I didn't take the elevator. The metal cage felt too exposed, a mirrored box where I would be forced to witness my own disintegration. Instead, I took the service stairs, my heels striking the perforated steel treads with a frantic staccato rhythm that echoed down the concrete shaft. I descended past the main floor, past the mezzanine, down into the bedrock of the building. The air grew cooler with every flight, the humidity dropping, the smell of floor wax replaced by the acidic, vinegary tang of degrading cellulose, and the sweet, heavy scent of red rot, leather turning slowly back into dust. I swiped my badge at the heavy fire door, the magnetic lock disengaging with a dull thud, and slipped inside. The darkness greeted me first. Then, the motion sensors picked up my presence. Click, hum, click, hum. The overhead fluorescent tubes flickered to life in a cascading wave, illuminating the long, narrow aisle of gray steel. I didn't go to the preservation cage. I went to the furthest corner, aisle 42, housing 19th century theological periodicals. Nobody ever comes here. I leaned my back against the cold metal end panel of a shelving unit, sliding down until I was crouching on the concrete floor. My breath was coming in ragged, shallow gasps, loud in the dead air. I peeled the white cotton gloves off my hands, the fabric damp with a cold sweat, and balled them up tight in my fist. I looked at my hand, my naked hand. It was still shaking. I pressed it flat against the cold concrete, trying to ground the energy, but the tremor wasn't muscular. It was systemic. I closed my eyes, anger flashing hot and bright behind my eyelids. I was furious at the lapse in discipline, furious at the Book of Hours for being so heavy. But mostly, I was furious at the lie I was trying to tell myself. It wasn't the book. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't the weight of the vellum or the fragility of the binding. It was the heat radiating from her coat. It was the way the air pressure in the room seemed to drop when she leaned in. It was the terrifying electric awareness of her shoulder, inches from mine. My professional armor, that carefully constructed exoskeleton of policies and procedures, hadn't just cracked. It had dissolved upon contact. I wasn't shaking because I almost dropped an artifact. I was shaking because for the first time in 10 years, I wanted to be touched more than I wanted to be safe. Clang, the sound of the heavy steel door unlatching at the far end of the stacks was unmistakable. It wasn't the polite click of a librarian's keycard. It was a forceful entry. I froze. The silence rushed back in, but now it was different. It was predatory. Footsteps. Not the shuffle of a researcher, but the deliberate, weighted strike of boots. She was walking down the center corridor, ignoring the authorized personnel only sign as if it were a suggestion for lesser mortals. She didn't call out my name. She didn't have to. The rhythmic click hum of the motion sensors announced her approach, the lights waking up one by one, tracking her progress toward me like a spotlight seeking a target. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, forcing my spine into that familiar, rigid line. I wouldn't be found crouching on the floor. Sadie turned the corner of aisle 42. The harsh, industrial lighting should have washed her out, made her look small and intrusive in this cathedral of gray steel. Instead, she seemed to consume the space. The shadows retreated from her. She stopped 10 feet away, her hands buried deep in the pockets of her coat, her amber eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying precision. She looked at the rows of dusty books, then back to me. "You run fast," she said. Her voice was low, carrying effortlessly in the acoustic dead zone. "This is a restricted area," I said. My voice was steady, but it lacked its usual authority. It sounded thin. "You don't have clearance." "I don't have a lot of things," Sadie countered, taking a slow step forward. "I don't have patience for protocol. I don't have a tolerance for lies. And I don't have the Book of Hours." "I told you," I said, crossing my arms over my chest, hiding my hands. "I needed tools. The binding was—" "Stop!" The word was soft, but it snapped like a whip. Sadie took another step. The aisle was narrow, barely 3 feet wide. She was closing the distance, and the air between us began to thicken, charged with the same static that had driven me from the reading room. "I didn't come down here for the book," she said, her gaze dropping to my elbows, where my hands were tucked away. "I came down here because I saw your hand." "It was a spasm," I lied, the words tasting like ash. "Fatigue. The lighting in the reading room is straining." "It wasn't fatigue," Sadie said. She moved again, entering my personal space. The scent of rain and sandalwood washed over me, drowning out the smell of old paper. She was close enough now that I could see the flecks of gold in her irises. "I know what fatigue looks like. That was a tremor. That was a fault line opening up." "You're imagining things," I whispered, backing up until my heels hit the shelf behind me. I was trapped. "Am I?" Sadie didn't stop until she was arm's length away. The stacks felt suddenly claustrophobic, the millions of words pressing in on us, sealing us in this narrow channel of concrete and steel. There was no audience here, no witnesses, just the hum of the ventilation and the woman who saw right through me. "Show me your hand," she said. It wasn't a request, it was an appraisal. "Show me your hand," she repeated softly. I didn't. I kept my arms locked across my chest, a defensive binding tight enough to bruise. Sadie didn't force it. Instead, she leaned back against the gray steel of the opposing shelf, her body creating a casual, terrifying angle in the rigid geometry of the stacks. Her gaze traveled up and down my frame, not with desire, not yet, but with a professional detachment that felt infinitely more invasive. She was assessing me. She was writing the condition report of my life. "Binding. Rigid," she murmured, her voice echoing the dry, clinical tone I used on acquisition forms, though hers carried a dark, smoky undertone. "Too rigid, and I see foxing around the edges." I flinched. "Foxing, the sign of chemical decay." "I don't," I said, the words sharp. "You do," she countered. She didn't touch me, but she raised a hand, her index finger tracing the air an inch from my temple. "Right here. The wear and tear of holding something volatile under high pressure. You are aging from the inside out, simply because you won't let anything breathe." Sadie laughed softly when I tried to argue about filtration systems. "I'm not talking about the room, preservationist. I'm talking about the atmosphere inside you. It's sterile. It's perfectly controlled. and it is profoundly lonely. It's not loneliness, I insisted, though my voice lacked conviction. It's preservation. It's survival. If you expose these things to the air, to the light, to people, they degrade, they rot. Acid hydrolysis sets in. The paper becomes brittle. They live, she corrected, stepping closer. Her heels on the concrete were a slow, deliberate percussion. What is the point of keeping a book pristine if it's never opened, if the pages are still uncut? It is just a brick of paper then, dead weight on a shelf. It has no function, it has no story until someone risks breaking the spine to actually read it. If you break the spine, you destroy the structural integrity, I argued, my heart rate spiking as she invaded my perimeter. You lose the history. No, Sadie said, her voice dropping, becoming a velvet trap. You make history. A book that has been read has a provenance of the heart. It has oil from thumbprints. It has dog ears marking the best parts. It has the scent of the person who loved it enough to hold it. You're so obsessed with keeping yourself mint condition that you've forgotten what you're actually for. She was close enough now that I could see the texture of her skin, the slight dilation of her pupils in the dim fluorescent light. She was challenging the very foundation of my existence. You're terrified of damage, she whispered, the truth landing between us like a heavy stone. You think if you let go, even for a second, you'll crumble into dust. I might, I admitted, the confession slipping out. Control is the only safety I know. If I open up, I can't be restored. There is no reversible tape for a human being. Once the archival seal is broken, it is broken forever. Sadie looked at me, really looked at me, her amber eyes darkening with something that wasn't just analysis anymore. Maybe you don't need restoration, she said. Maybe you just need to be handled. The air in the aisle seemed to vanish. My lungs felt tight, compressed by the sheer weight of her proximity and the implication of her words. I couldn't breathe in the static she generated. I turned away, physically unable to bear the scrutiny of those eyes, and began walking deeper into the maze of the stacks, away from the exit, seeking the darker, narrower aisles where the shadows were thick enough to hide me. We need to check the storm drains, I said, a nonsensical excuse, my voice trembling. You can run if you want, Sadie called out, her footsteps falling in sync with mine, a shadow I couldn't shake. But we are running out of aisle. I kept walking until the concrete ended. Aisle 58, 19th century poetry, a dead end, a cul-de-sac of Victorian longing bound in crushed Morocco leather. I turned, my back pressing against the cold metal end cap, expecting to see empty space. Instead, I saw her. Sadie had anticipated the trap. She wasn't behind me, she was already there, blocking the exit, sealing the aisle. The space was impossibly tight, maybe 24 inches of clearance. To leave, I would have to brush past her, a physical impossibility given the voltage of the air between us. Nowhere left to archive yourself, she murmured. She stepped in. The distance evaporated. She didn't touch me, not skin to skin, but she created a cage of presence. She raised her left arm, leaning her hand against the shelf just above my shoulder. The rough wool of her coat brushed against the sleeve of my cardigan. It was a friction so slight it shouldn't have registered, yet it sent a shockwave through my nervous system that nearly buckled my knees. I stopped breathing. I had to. If I inhaled, I would fill my lungs with her, the damp wool, the ozone, the warm scent of a living woman in a tomb of dead words. Sadie, I warned, but it came out as a plea. Hush. She wasn't looking at me. Her eyes were scanning the spines next to my head. I'm just looking for a reference. She reached across me with her other hand. Her body pressed in, a wall of heat radiating through the layers of our clothes. It was suffocating. It was intoxicating. Her chest was inches from mine. I could feel the radiant warmth of her skin, a furnace against the cool, climate-controlled air of the basement. I was flattened against the books, the spines digging into my shoulder blades, trapped between the rigidity of the past and the overwhelming, chaotic heat of the present. Her arm crossed my field of vision. She didn't grab a book immediately. Her fingers trailed over the leather spines, hovering, teasing the silence. Then her index finger hooked the top of a slim volume. She pulled it out, the leather sliding against its neighbors with a soft rasp. She opened it. She was so close that to read the page, she had to lean her forehead down, bringing her lips dangerously close to my ear. I could feel the ghost of her breath, hot and rhythmic, against the sensitive skin of my neck. Listen to this, she whispered. The sound vibrated in my collarbone. I am certain of nothing but the holiness of the heart's affections. Keats. Of course. She didn't look at the page. She turned her head slightly, her nose grazing my hairline. He knew about preservation, too, about freezing a moment on an urn forever, but he knew it was a lie, cold pastoral. My resistance didn't snap. It dissolved. It melted like wax. I couldn't think in straight lines anymore. My mind, usually a catalog of clear directives, was looping on sensory inputs. The heat of her stomach near mine, the smell of rain on her collar, the way her breath hitched just slightly when I finally exhaled. "You're trembling again," she noted, her voice a low rumble against my chest. "I'm cold," I lied, knowing she could feel the heat radiating off me. "You're not cold," Sadie corrected, closing the book with a soft snap. She didn't move away. She stayed there, boxing me in, her body a heavy, grounding weight against the flight response, screaming in my limbs. "You're burning up. That's the cost, isn't it? You spend so much energy trying not to shake that you've forgotten how to feel. You've turned yourself into stone to survive the quiet." I looked up. Her face was inches away. The amber eyes were dark, searching. "I'm not stone," I whispered. "Prove it," she challenged. Before I could answer, the building groaned. A massive, rolling crack of thunder detonated directly overhead, shaking the foundation. The lights flickered, once, twice, and then, with a final electronic sigh, the stacks plunged into absolute darkness. The darkness wasn't absolute, but the change was violent. The hum of the main ventilation killed instantly, leaving a ringing void that lasted exactly 2 seconds before the emergency generators kicked in. They didn't restore the clean, white clinical light of the preservation lab. Instead, the backup floods bathed the stacks in a deep, murky amber. It was the color of old varnish, of preservation fluid, of things trapped in resin. It turned the gray steel shelves into a cage of golden shadow, distorting the familiar geometry of the library into something intimate and strange. The storm outside answered the darkness. Rain began to lash against the high, narrow transom windows at the top of the foundation wall. It wasn't a gentle patter, it was a deluge. The sound drummed through the concrete, a rhythmic, heavy bass line that sealed the rest of the world away. The library upstairs, the students, the deadlines, the protocols, ceased to exist. There was only this aisle. There was only the amber light. There was only her. Sadie didn't pull back. In the sudden dimness, her eyes seemed to catch every photon of the emergency lighting, glowing with a predatory intelligence. The shift in atmosphere was physical. The professional context that had acted as a thin, fraying barrier between us evaporated completely. We weren't the head of preservation and the external appraiser anymore. We were just 2 women breathing the same recycled air in the dark. "Well," she murmured, her voice dropping even lower, vibrating in the sudden quiet of the ventilation systems. "That changes the reading conditions." "The power grid is unstable," I said automatically, but the words felt hollow. I was clinging to technicalities like a lifeline, but the rope had already snapped. "Forget the grid," Sadie said. She shifted her weight, the movement causing her coat to brush against my hip again. The friction sent a fresh spike of adrenaline through my blood. "Forget the inventory. Look at where we are." She wasn't talking about the basement. She was talking about the space between us. It was charged, thick with the static of unexpressed things. She looked tired suddenly, the amber light revealing fine lines around her eyes that the harsh fluorescence had hidden. The arrogance softened into something wearier, more human. "You think I was born this loud?" she asked, tilting her head back against the shelf, exposing the long line of her throat. "You think I walk into rooms and break things because I enjoy the noise?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. "I built a fortress once too," she confessed, her gaze drifting up to the shadowed ceiling. "London, a gallery in Mayfair. I wore the gloves. I spoke in whispers. I thought if I was perfect enough, if I was quiet enough, the chaos of the world would slide right off me like water off glass." "What happened?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. "Life happened," Sadie said, her eyes snapping back to mine. "It doesn't care about your gloves. It gets in. It stains the pages. I spent years trying to keep the dust off until I realized I was just suffocating the art. And myself." She paused, her expression sharpening. "I poked you today because I recognize the architecture. I know how much energy it takes to keep those walls standing. I wanted to see what was under the dust jacket." The metaphor landed with the weight of a physical touch. She hadn't been mocking me. She had been searching for me. I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time without the filter of my own defensiveness. I didn't see a rival. I didn't see a disruption. I saw a mirror. The amber light softened the sharp angles of her face, making her look less like a storm and more like the shelter you seek when the rain starts. The irritation that had fueled me for weeks dissolved, leaving a terrifying, hollow space in my chest. And then, just as quickly, the space filled. It filled with heat. The tension in the aisle coiled tight, a physical pressure that made my skin prickle. It wasn't the air pressure from the storm. It was the undeniable gravitational pull of her body against mine. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant. The sound of the rain was a constant, thrumming reminder that we were storm-bound, isolated in the belly of the archive. There was no one coming to check the fuses. There was no one to witness the breach of protocol. The air felt thick, charged with the static of unexpressed attraction, waiting for the single spark that would burn the whole collection down. Sadie moved. It wasn't a sudden lunge, nothing so clumsy as that. It was a shift in gravity. She stepped into the last remaining inch of air between us, her presence collapsing the void. Her hand rose, not to touch me, not yet, but to rest on the gray metal shelf right beside my head. The sound of her ring clicking against the steel was sharp, a punctuation mark ending the long, run-on sentence of my solitude. She had boxed me in. I waited for the panic. I waited for the familiar, cold wash of adrenaline that usually sent me scrambling for the exit, citing fire codes or occupancy limits. But my feet felt heavy, magnetized to the concrete floor. The amber emergency light cast deep, liquid shadows across her face, turning her eyes into pools of dark honey. She didn't speak. She just tilted her head slightly, a silent, terrifying interrogation. "Are you going to run?" I looked at the exit, then back at her. The choice hung in the humid air, heavy as the storm outside. To leave meant safety. It meant going back to the white gloves, the 65 degrees, the perfect, lonely preservation of a life unlived. To stay meant ruin. It meant damage. I didn't run. I did something worse. I let go. I let the tension that had held my spine straight for a decade simply snap. I leaned back. The spines of the Victorian poetry collection dug into my shoulder blades. Hard, unforgiving leather ridges. But I didn't care. I tipped my head back against the shelf, exposing the pale, vulnerable line in my throat. It was a gesture of total, reckless submission. It was an invitation. Sadie watched the movement. Her gaze dropped to the pulse fluttering wildly at the base of my neck, visible beneath the skin. Then she reached out. Her hand was warm, devastatingly, impossibly warm. Her fingertips grazed the sharp angle of my jawline, light as a breath. The contact was electric. It was a sudden, shocking circuit closing after years of heavy insulation. I stopped breathing. The sensation was so acute it bordered on pain, a sensory overload that made my vision blur at the edges. She wasn't just touching me, she was reading the surface, mapping the tension that coiled beneath the skin like a tightly bound spine. "You're holding your breath," she whispered. Her voice was rough, stripped of all its professional polish. I couldn't answer. I could only feel. Her thumb brushed over the corner of my mouth, testing the give of my lips. My mouth parted on a shaky exhale, the sound loud in the quiet aisle. She traced the line of my cheekbone, her touch slow, deliberate, the way an appraiser handles a fragile acquisition. She was testing the structural integrity. She was looking for the weak points, and God, she was finding them everywhere. For years, I had treated my body like a restricted collection. No unauthorized handling, no direct light, always behind glass. Now the glass was shattered. I could feel the calluses on her fingertips, the roughness of real life against my synthesized calm. It was overwhelming. It was the most terrified I had ever been, and yet I leaned into her palm. I chased the heat. "Tell me to stop," she murmured, her eyes searching mine. It was a dare. It was a lifeline she was offering, knowing I wouldn't take it. I shook my head. The movement was barely there, a micro gesture against her palm. "I can't," I breathed. The admission hung there, raw and terrifying. Her eyes darkened. The question in them vanished, replaced by a fierce resolve. Her hand slid from my jaw, moving back, fingers tangling in the severe bun I'd pinned so carefully that morning. She found the first pin, but I didn't wait. I reached up, my own fingers joining hers, finding the steel clips and pulling them free. One by one, they hit the concrete floor with tiny metallic pings. I shook my head, letting the weight of my hair fall loose, cascading down my neck. The metaphor was literal now. I wasn't just coming undone, I was breaking the seal myself. I realized then that I had been wrong about everything. I thought control was about keeping things exactly as they were, frozen in time. But this unraveling, this terrifying slide into chaos, this was the only thing that felt real. I wasn't a curator watching from behind the barrier anymore. I was the artifact. And for the first time in my history, I was being handled. Sadie's hand tightened in my loose hair, gently pulling my head back further, exposing me completely to her gaze. The distance between us was gone. There was only the heat, the amber light, and the woman who had finally broken the seal. The space between us didn't just close, it collapsed. When her mouth finally found mine, it wasn't tentative. It wasn't a question. It was a collision. For a decade, I had lived in a world of look but don't touch, a world where the most precious things were kept behind UV-filtered plexiglass. But there was no glass here. The impact was startlingly, violently real. It was the shock of hot coffee on a cold morning, the sudden jolt of waking up from a long gray dream. Her lips were soft, but the intent behind them was firm, demanding a response I hadn't known I was capable of giving. I tasted the bitter linger of the espresso she drinks black and the sharp, cool spike of mint, a sensory overload that short-circuited every protocol I had ever written. My hands, which had been clutching the edges of my cardigan like a shield, finally moved. They didn't push her away. They reached out, desperate and clumsy, finding the lapels of her damp wool coat. I gripped the fabric, pulling her closer, anchoring myself to the storm instead of the shelter. I gasped, a sharp, ragged sound that was swallowed by her mouth. The kiss wasn't polite, it was messy and urgent, a frantic exchange of air that felt less like romance and more like survival. Sadie's hand tightened in my hair, her fingers scraping lightly against my scalp, grounding me in the physical reality of the moment. The sensation sent a shiver racing down my spine, shattering the last remnants of my composure. I wasn't the head of preservation anymore. I was just a woman, pressed against a metal shelf in the dark, unraveling in the arms of the one person who had dared to read the text. She broke the kiss, pulling back just an inch, but she didn't leave. She rested her forehead against mine, our breaths mingling in short, heated bursts. The air between us was heavy, humid, charged with the electricity of what had just happened. I was panting, my chest heaving against hers, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Breathe," she whispered, her voice rough, a low rumble that vibrated through my bones. I managed to choke out, the words trembling, and I was. For the first time in years, I was actually breathing, not the shallow, regulated sips of air I took to keep my heart rate down, but deep, lung-filling gulps of life. Her arms slid around my waist, abandoning the shelf to pull me flush against her. The contact was absolute. There was no space left for air, for light, for doubt. I could feel the solid warmth of her body, the steady beat of her heart answering mine. My hands, which had been trembling for an hour, were suddenly steady. They found the curve of her waist, fingers digging into the wool of her coat, not to push her away, but to pull her closer. The fear was gone, replaced by a fierce, grounding certainty. And Sadie didn't pull away. She held me tighter, her embrace a containment field that didn't restrict but supported. "See?" she murmured, her lips grazing my temple. "You didn't crumble." "I might still," I whispered. But the fear was gone, replaced by a hunger that terrified me in a different way. "Then I'll catch you." She didn't wait for permission. She kissed me again, and this time the urgency bled away, replaced by a slow, sultry depth that was infinitely more dangerous. It was a savoring. It was a confirmation. Her mouth moved over mine with a deliberate, languid heat, exploring the contours of the damage she had caused. It felt like she was rewriting my history, one breath at a time, annotating the margins of a life I had left blank for too long. I melted against her, my hand sliding up her coat to tangle in the damp hair at the nape of her neck. The smell of rain and old paper and desire was a thick, intoxicating fog. I wanted to stay here forever, lost in the amber dark, suspended in this perfect, impossible moment where the only thing that mattered was the pressure of her lips and the weight of her hands. Then, reality intruded with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. A mechanical clack echoed through the basement, loud enough to make us both jump. The overhead fluorescence buzzed, flickered once, a strobe warning, and then slammed back to full, blinding power. The amber dream vanished, replaced instantly by the harsh, unforgiving glare of the preservation lights. We froze, blinking in the sudden brightness, the spell shattered by the return of the grid. The fluorescent hum was an accusation. It bleached the shadows away, leaving us exposed in the harsh, white glare of reality. I blinked, shielding my eyes, feeling the sudden, vertiginous shift from the amber dreamscape back to the cold geometry of the preservation facility. Usually this is the moment where the shame sets in. This is where I scramble to reassemble the facade, to tuck the stray hairs back into place, to smooth the wrinkles in my skirt, to apologize for the lapse in protocol. I waited for the regret to flood my system, for the preservationist inside me to scream at the damage done. But the scream never came. I looked at Sadie. She was blinking too, her pupils contracting in the light. She looked disheveled. The woman who wore her confidence like armor had lipstick smudged at the corner of her mouth. Her coat was askew, the collar turned up on one side. Her breathing was still syncing with mine, a visible rise and fall that matched my own rhythm. And looking at her, seeing the physical evidence of what we had just done, I realized I didn't feel shame. I felt alive. I felt unbound. I reached up to fix my hair. My hand brushed the loose strands cascading over my shoulders. A violation of the dress code, a safety hazard in the machinery of the archives. 10 minutes ago, I would have panicked. I would have hunted for the pins on the concrete floor, desperate to pin the chaos back down. Now, I just let it fall. I smoothed my cardigan, buttoning it over the rapid beat of my heart, but I left the hair wild. I left the evidence. "You look," Sadie started, her voice raspy, clearing her throat to find the professional register again. She stopped, a slow, crooked smile spreading across her face. "You look like a first edition that's finally been read." "The condition report will be extensive," I murmured, but there was no bite in it. The professional jargon felt different in my mouth now, less like a shield, more like an inside joke. We walked out of the stacks together. The journey back up to the surface felt like a decompression. The metal stairs didn't echo with the sound of my retreat anymore. They rang with the rhythm of a shared conspiracy. We weren't the preservationist and the intruder. We were co-authors of a new text. The silence in the stairwell wasn't empty. It was heavy with the promise of what came next. Every step took us further from the sanctuary of the dark, but I carried the heat of the aisle with me, a secret burning beneath my ribs. In the lobby, the storm had finally broken. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the streetlights reflecting in the puddles outside the glass doors. The security guard nodded as we passed, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred in the basement. He saw 2 women leaving work. He didn't see the wreckage of a decade's worth of walls. The polished marble floor reflected my silhouette, no longer rigid but softer, blurred at the edges. Sadie paused at the door, turning to face me. The fluorescent lights of the lobby were unforgiving, but she didn't look away. She reached out, her hand hovering for a second before brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. A public, flagrant act of intimacy that made my breath hitch. "I have to finish the appraisal tomorrow," she said. It wasn't a schedule, it was a promise. "The collection will be here," I answered. Sadie leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the ambient noise of the building. "You know, about that manuscript," she said, her eyes dancing with the memory of the reading room. "The one you were so afraid to drop. In my professional opinion, some things are infinitely more valuable once they've been handled. Mint condition is just another word for untouched, and you were never meant to be kept behind glass." She turned and walked out into the night, the glass doors sliding shut behind her. I stood there alone in the center of the lobby. The air conditioning hummed. The humidity was perfect, but I didn't reach for my gloves. I shoved my bare hands into my pockets, feeling the rough lining, feeling the heat of my own skin. I watched her disappear into the dark, realizing that my heart had a history now, a provenance of touch, of risk, of rain. The reading room is quiet again today. The hydrometer's read steady, the dust is settling, but the silence isn't empty anymore. It vibrates with potential, with the echo of a crash and the memory of a kiss in the dark. I touched my lips, tracing the ghost of the connection, knowing the seal is broken for good. If you've ever found a story written in the margins of your own life, subscribe to follow where this chapter leads.